You're listening to the Business Brain Food Podcast. This is episode 133.
Welcome to the podcast that gives you direct access to the world's leading business building experts. Head to MaxMyProfit.com.au to catch up on past episodes, download your free business growth tools, and access show notes for every single episode. Now here's your host, Ben Futrell.
Well, g'day and welcome back to another episode of Business Brain Food. This, my friend, is the podcast that's 100% devoted to taking you and your business to the next level. And the good news is, doesn't matter whether you're brand new to this business thing, so maybe you're just scratching that entrepreneurial itch, or maybe you're like myself and you've been in this game for a while and you've got what am I trying to say? You've got the scars and the wounds to prove it from your efforts as being an entrepreneur. Stuff that intro up a little bit, but that's okay. We're going to keep rolling because I'm human and you understand that. That sometimes it just doesn't roll off the tongue. I should just pre-record an intro and I'd be done, but I don't like doing that. I like making it real and bringing you the show live. It feels like it's live anyway. Today we've got Troy Gray coming on the channel. Troy's an amazing guy. Started off in AFL, ended up in radio, then television, and now has a business that is launching internationally and getting clients all over the world really super interested in what he's doing. Along with that, we talk a bit about how he's got investors and capital and people behind him and why he feels that's super important to your business succeeding. Now, before we do get into chatting to Troy, I wanted to just say thank you for tuning back in. Now, if you're a first-time listener, welcome to the Business Brain Food Podcast. Great to have you here. Great to have you tuning in, and hopefully you get a lot out of not just this episode, but the past 132 episodes. We've had some amazing guests on and some amazing tips and tricks and things that you can go back and listen to, and I'm sure it's going to take your business to the next level. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. Nice to see you again. How are you? Awesome. Nice to hear that things are going well for you. Alrighty. So if you are enjoying the show, what I'd love to do is invite you into our private Facebook group. Because the private Facebook group is a place for us to communicate, hang out, chit-chat, and answer anything business-related, get to know each other and network. And you can do that by going to facebook.com/groups/businessbrainfood and apply to join the group, and hopefully myself and my team will get you approved pretty quickly. We'll get you in there. We're having a good old chat in there about all things business and you're missing out. So go to facebook.com/groups/businessbrainfood. The other way, if you want to find that, we can go to our brand new website, which is businessbrainfood.com.au. And I know in the intro, the show used to be hosted on our main website, MaxMyProfit.com.au, but we've now built one just for the show. It's getting so popular, we decided to separate it as BusinessBrainFood.com.au. Now, the benefit for you with that is that you can go to every single past episode, go through all the different show notes, click on all the different links, and iTunes has a limitation as to how many episodes it will host. So I think it only hosts the last 100. So if you want to get the first 30-odd shows that were recorded before this one, you go to BusinessBrainFood.com.au and all the shows are there. We have an amazing podcast player there that was built by a fellow called Pat Flynn called the Smart Podcast Player that allows you to get access to each and every episode and, like I said, access the show notes, which have all the links in it that I discuss with my guests during the show. So businessbrainfood.com.au will give you access to everything you know, along with any information about the show that you need. It's all there. All right. Well, today, my guest today is Troy Gray. Now, Troy is known for probably more so for being an AFL footballer. He played for Sydney Swans and for St Kilda. So if you're into footy in Australia, that's one of our football codes, AFL. And he was a player for those two teams. He then moved across into radio just through his own interest in radio, and then ended up being in television. And in fact, some of you may know him as Jack McLeod, and he was on. He was one of the actors in one of the most successful Australian dramas that were ever aired on television in Australia, called McLeods Daughters. So he was Jack McLeod. But he's been now firmly entrenched in that industry for the last 15 years and has created, produced and presented multiple TV shows across a number of formats. And many of these TV projects have won awards and screened internationally. So when it comes to getting his idea out there, getting people to get inspired and enrolled and on board, Troy is fantastic at it. In addition to his filming success, he's also spent many years as an on-air talent with 9 News, several national programs. He also has a strong history in radio, both as an announcer and a producer. He's been an integral part of the founding team for huge international projects. And those large-scale ventures have seen Troy work alongside some of the biggest names in television, in addition to luminaries from the international sporting and music landscape. So he's certainly got himself out there. Today, he's now launched a company called Vox Ventures, or some years ago, which is a multi-platform media company specialising in creating and syndicating new and innovative television concepts on a global scale. And for an Aussie to be doing this in that space is pretty amazing stuff. It's also the entity that Troy Gray conducts his entertainment business under. So Vox Ventures, you can go to his website, which is troygray.com.au, and that'll shoot you across to Vox Ventures. But he specialises in television production as well as all forms of public speaking. Currently, he continues his role as a TV presenter, hosting and producing documentaries and emceeing functions on a weekly basis. So, of course, if you love the sound of Troy and you love his story and you want to get along to one of your events, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to be doing that. But the main thing we're going to talk about today is certainly a bit about how his background in sports and TV have helped him in growing his business. But we're also going to talk about his entrepreneurial flair and what are some of the things that he's done that have worked really well and catapulted him into this successful space he's in now with Vox Ventures. So without any further delay, let's get Troy onto the Business Brain Food podcast.
Learn more to earn more.
So I'm excited to have Troy joining me on the Business Brain Food podcast today. Welcome to the show, Troy.
Ben, great to be on board.
My absolute pleasure, buddy. My absolute pleasure. Good to have an Aussie on. I've had a few Americans lately. Not that there's anything wrong with the Yankees, but it's good to have some Aussie talent back on the show when it comes to entrepreneurialism and growing a business. Now, before we do get stuck into having our chit chat, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask every guest, and that is for you to share something quirky about yourself.
It's time for something quirky. And now, something quirky.
Well, I don't know whether to be embarrassed or proud, but I know every single word to Ice Ice Baby, the song, and I love it, and I sing it multiple times to as many people that would listen.
I'd have to say that would be embarrassing.
I'm proud. There's a lot of words in that song, so it's a long time to learn.
I mean, yeah, but you must have a good memory. But that's one weird song to pick. That is definitely quirky. And when do you break that one out, Troy?
Generally comes out after about beer number 6, but in a group where there's lots of laughter, and it's generally something that excites the crowd. So yeah, it's come out in front of people of 3 or 4 in a room, and I've also been on stage at a number of events where there's been thousands and got them up rocking. So it's good fun. Great stuff.
Well, we could talk about your ability. I mean, I won't get you to knock out any bars of it either because you haven't had enough beers. But it's good. We could talk about that all day. But what I'd rather talk about is your career, I guess. You kicked off playing AFL for Sydney and St Kilda football clubs many, many years ago. Maybe you could tell the listeners a bit about where you've been and where you are now. Give us a bit of the journey, the Troy Gray journey.
Yeah, sure. I'm a country boy from rural New South Wales in the Riverina area, so a place called Leeton. Pretty much everyone was either growing rice or oranges, and that's where I was heading in the farm-related business, I suppose, until football came knocking. At 16, 17, I was drafted to the Sydney Swans. I had some really good years there. Unfortunately, the first few years we were poor, and so poor that we came last, so a couple of wooden spoons in the closet early in the piece, and right through to when the Swans eventually made the 96 grand final. So an enormous turnaround there that I was part of, and then traded down to the St Kilda Football Club in Melbourne. And then ultimately my football journey brought me over to Adelaide. So I've seen some great cities and some wonderful sites and made some great friends.
Yeah, great. So you're now based in Adelaide, aren't you?
Yep, correct. I came over here originally just for a season or two of football, and I was adamant that I'd return back to New South Wales, but got a bit of work in the media and a few other business opportunities, and I've stayed.
Yeah, great stuff. Now, I'm always interested to see a lot of people that are athletes and been in sporting teams, definitely in successful sporting teams, end up being great at running businesses. Why do you think that is? Is it because you come from that team background and you understand it takes a group of people to succeed? Or what do you think it is that leads a lot of sports people into business?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think the number one word would be discipline. We have to be somewhere at a certain time, and we're all working together to achieve a certain result. And I think that's the really cool thing about team sports is ultimately you're always, despite how you're feeling on that given day or any given week, you're always trying to do your best to achieve an overall result. So I think that's why sports people do become accustomed to working with others. Listening to others as well is always a good one. And ultimately, when you share that success in a team environment, there's nothing better.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was it that ignited the spark in you to start your own business?
I suppose it might sound strange, but I even at an early age was always talking to people at the end of a day and was surprised by how many people generally or genuinely weren't happy with their work environment. They were constantly complaining about, I've had such a bad day and I don't like my job and I don't look forward to getting out of bed in the morning. And I just thought, at what point do you continue doing that? Because it can't be good for you, in particular that positive outlook on life, which I've always wanted to have. And I was wondering why these people persisted to work in an environment where they weren't happy. So I thought, well, perhaps I can try and teach myself some business skills and ultimately be the master of my own destiny.
Yeah, great. So I don't think it's weird at all. I think it's a very logical way to go into business and understand. I mean, a lot of people go into business, they wanting to be the master of their own destiny. We see so many businesses that don't work well. And as entrepreneurs, we all have our failures from time to time. I've had my fair share. Even though we want to be the master of our destinies, what do you think it is that stops so many people from succeeding?
Well, it would be exactly that. It'd be the fear of ultimately it not working, or the fear of taking that first step. And a lot of us also, I suppose, believe that we don't have the knowledge. And essentially that's why someone like yourself and what you do, it empowers others to actually listen and to find out that in layman's terms, there are ways that for anyone, regardless of where you're brought up or how you were brought up, to essentially pigeonhole what is it that you like, and then how do you take that next step into developing that like or that passion into a model that might be ultimately a business.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, and I'm interested to know, Troy, because you've ended up in the television space. Is that because you had contacts from being in football? You sort of get to meet people that are in the television space, or is that just a direction that you're really passionate about? How did you end up getting into entertainment?
I wouldn't say it was through sport, although a lot of people obviously do on the back of their sporting careers get into television. But I was a sports person, but I was never an elite player. I played many years and made some great friends, but ultimately, you have to be in the top few to sort of go straight through and to have that presence on television. But I was always interested in seeing how behind the scenes work. So essentially in radio in particular, I started just going in at the graveyard shift voluntarily and watching how people produced and edited and worked radio programs for the following morning. And then that developed into me starting to do on-air stuff, or as an announcer with multiple radio shows, but also getting the passion not only for producing radio, but also then for, I wonder how television works. So again, behind the scenes, started doing things after hours and weekends and whenever I had a chance at no cost to anyone, but just gave up my time to go and assist and learn. And I started seeing how things were developed and had a presence in front of television, yes, but ultimately it was the behind the scenes and the creation of coming up with my own product that drove me to where I am today.
Yeah, because you mentioned you weren't one of the top AFL players, but you certainly were playing for one of the top AFL teams. And same with television. I mean, you went from radio onto television, and some people might actually know you as Jack McLeod because you were one of the stars of McLeods Daughters back, maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah, I had a fleeting appearance. It was quite bizarre. I do a lot of MC work, and I was on stage and I came off, and there was a director from that TV series, which ultimately was probably, or if not the most successful Australian series ever to go worldwide. And they said to me, "You've got this certain look and a presence. Maybe would you like to come and audition?" And I must say that I've never acted before, and the audition was horrendous. I really didn't enjoy it, but they thought there was enough there to work with and gave me a role, and I ended up, having a bit of time on the show, and it was really good.
Yeah, great stuff. You didn't break out Ice Ice Baby at that audition.
I did. That's why they might have thought this guy's a bit quirky. Let's just run with him. He seems fun.
Let's take him. Now, all this has led to you running your own business in that industry called Vox Ventures. Maybe tell us a bit about that business and sort of where that's at.
Sure. Well, Vox Ventures actually started off as me having an entity to do a lot of my contract work through, so in particular my public speaking. And so as I was doing my radio and television work, I just had this small entity that essentially allowed me to send invoices out. And then that grew into, I've always had a passion for travel. So as I was traveling, I started subcontracting film crews to join me and actually come up with some really cool documentaries in different parts of the world. won some awards on the back of those and started syndicating documentaries to multiple countries. And then ultimately in the last 12 to 24 months, Vox Ventures is focusing mostly on creating large-scale unscripted formats. So for those that aren't in television, that's the reality genre. And I've now been lucky enough to have a number of my shows picked up by global distributors and big-scale production houses in different territories.
Now, you say lucky enough, but, is it luck or is it the fact that you've been skillful in the way that you've approached it and marketed your business?
I suppose there's an element of luck, but I'd like to think it's part two. I definitely have been exceptionally passionate about how I go about it. But once again, and like you would, I'm sure, would preach to those, that there's two ways to go about it. There's the way that everyone is doing it. And in my particular industry, a lot of people are coming up with ideas, putting them on paper, and then trying to land them on the desk of some TV executive in the hope that it turns into a show. I ultimately have done things in the reverse. I've essentially done all of the heavy lifting before I've made the pitch. So I've developed partners worldwide. I've even gone and got hold of the world's biggest advertising agency in BBDO. BBDO are they've got 180 offices in 80 countries, and I've got access to their brands, and then those brands being development funding. So if you go to a TV network or a production company and you're armed with money and development funding and investors and collaborative partners, they're already willing to listen before you've even given them the pitch. So that's where I was able to, I suppose, jump a few steps and get in front of some of the other parties that were submitting some great ideas.
And what was it that led you to learn that was the ideal way to pitch something? Was it that you just wanted to be different, or did you actually go and research what they're listening to or looking for?
Yeah, I definitely researched, but the funny thing about the research was that everyone was telling people to do things the same way. It was how to write a pitch and how to formulate that pitch verbally, as well as how to put it into a format that would get you, to the top of the pile. But I did try that way a couple of times, but I just wasn't hearing back from anyone. I wasn't even getting a phone call or not even a reply email. And to try and even set up a meeting was virtually impossible, because you're coming from a background where you're not an experienced, television producer. You're merely someone breaking into the industry with another idea. So, I just started thinking, well, how does television work? Well, ultimately it works because they need to make money, and to make money they need brands. So those brands all relate to advertising revenue. So if I can tie all of those things into one and already have it in my back pocket, by the time I go and make my introduction, they're already wanting to find out more.
Yeah, it's making it easy for them by the sounds of things.
Yeah, well, it is. And one of the other things that I've done recently as well is to concentrate on a template with television shows that mean that they're ultimately interactive. Now when we're watching reality shows, most people, especially in Australia, we're saturated with the same type of show, and a lot of the correspondence from the viewing public is that, how many building shows or weight loss shows or romance shows, can we actually have before it just becomes the same old, same old. So, we started doing a number of workshops in a lot of countries, and we just asked directly to people, what is it that you want to see on TV? So most of my ideas have come from people themselves that have said, this is what we'd like. And one of the things that they want is to have more say in how they interact with a show and potentially the outcome of a show. So we have built an API framework with a global digital design and development agency that hopefully is going to change the way we watch telly.
Yeah, and isn't that a great bit of insight there, that you've gone to the end user to find out what they want rather than building what you want? I mean, was it always that way for you, or did you think, no, this is the smart way, I better go and ask the audience what they're after before I even put pen to paper?
I think it's always been the way, because when I got involved in radio do that exceptionally well. Radio always bring in the listeners. They might bring in 30 or 40 and throw on a few pizzas and some drinks and put them in a room and just say to them, what do you think of our station? What are you liking? What music? What about our different shows? And they're ultimately getting feedback directly from the people they're trying to impress. So, I started doing that from a very early stage. And as I started hearing what people wanted, I developed a template that essentially has created a lot of these shows, which was based on what does the viewer want and how does the viewer actually have more say in it. And ultimately, the viewer can actually become part of the show And there's a reward on the end of that, not only financially, but there's that sort of that star power. We've also got jobs on the end of it, and a whole number of things that mean that if you're a person that's watching telly and you've ever had an idea of what you'd like, that's the style of person that I want to hear from, because we can turn that into reality.
Yeah, great stuff. And I think, you mentioned before that fear stops a lot of people, and Australia is a small fish in a very big pond, and that whole reality TV, segment is flooded, isn't it? Saturated with a lot of different shows and ideas. I'm sure they're getting millions and millions of ideas, or at least thousands of ideas all the time that they could be running with. So I'm interested. You also hit the nail on the head saying that it is a business, right? And they've got to make money out of it. So what is it that you've done to make yourself stand out from that crowd? Because I'm sure there's these whether they're producers or organisations that are producing shows, are getting a lot of ideas thrown at them. How do you make sure that your pitch is the one that they do listen to?
Well, probably a good example there is I got invited to do a bit of speaking at a convention on Grammys weekend in the United States, and that was only about a month ago now. And when I went over there, it was just full of people in the industry that I must say there's a fair bit of ego and everyone out trying to outdo each other. And at the end of that conference, which was a full-day conference, I had taken a photograph of a screen, and that screen that was showcasing all the names of the speakers and what they did ultimately became my ammunition to come back to Australia and then start contacting these people and just saying to them in a not a long format, but very briefly, I was inspired by what you had to say. I'm doing some really cool things to it, mind, and I think that there's an opportunity for you to collaborate and for everyone to come out in front. So I didn't try and sell them anything at the start. I simply just said, you're a person that inspires me, and I've got an idea that can make you money. If you'd like to hear more, get back to me. And ultimately, I'd say 75% of those people did, and probably 50% of those have now followed up to actually introduce me to people I never thought I'd be corresponding with.
Yeah, so that's just a great example of awesome marketing, good call to action, and a nice headline that gets attention.
Exactly. And one of the things is how often, and you would have it, the listeners would have it, do you get an email, and whether it's from a charity or from someone spruiking a business, and you're probably 2 or 3 sentences in and you realise that there's this long email that's offering you very little, and then you essentially just stop it or you delete it and you don't go any further. So if you can come up with a plan or an introduction or an elevator pitch that just simply grabs the attention of someone and they want to ask you for more, well, they'll do that, and then you can provide them with that information and go from there.
Yeah, which is I think so fundamentally important for any business owner to be able to articulate that quickly, isn't it? When you talk about the elevator pitch, you're talking about something that can be said between the ground floor and the third floor. It's something that grabs their attention but piques their interest at the same time.
Exactly, and that's why a radio commercial or a TV advertisement goes for 30 seconds. They can, in that time, get across a message that inspires the listener or the viewer. So it's no different to meeting someone in a bar and they ask you, what do you do? If you're still talking about yourself 10 minutes later, I'd say that there'll be someone that'll have a yawn or a lack of attention to try and find out more. So, yeah, inspire them and get them asking questions. Yeah,
great stuff. Now, what are some of the goals that you've kicked recently? Pardon the pun from your footy career back then. But what are some of the goals you've achieved recently that you can share with the listeners to get a bit of an idea of where Vox Ventures is heading?
One of the most significant ones is a partnership with Fremantle Media. Fremantle Media are one of the biggest production companies in the world with their head office in London, and I was able to get them interested to a point where they were having me interact with their executives and their acquisition people on a global level, and they contracted and took up options on a number of my shows. Those shows then were lucky enough to go over to several international markets, and as recently as last week, they were showcased at the biggest expo held annually for television, which is in Cannes in France. So the same as the film festival, but for television. And, yeah, people from all over the world come and buy and sell ideas. So I'd say that was awesome for me to sort of feel part of, but also signing an arrangement with BBDO, the world's biggest advertising agency, as I mentioned earlier, by simply looking at who's the biggest agency in the world with access to the biggest brands, and then jumping on a plane and going to Melbourne, where they have a franchise in Australia, and showcasing to them what I'm doing, the investors that I have, the interest that I've generated globally, and how they could be first to market with their clients to be part of something very special. So I'm really proud of that.
Well, good on you, mate. Well done. It's great. Good to hear you succeeding and kicking some goals there. Because as always, as I said before, Aussies, we're a small fish in a big pond, aren't we? I mean, there's a lot of people out there probably pushing the same barrow, and to be at the front of the queue is pretty cool.
Absolutely. We are a small fish, and it is very difficult. In particular, we seem to hit up, even if we're in the television industry, or it might be in the technology space, or agriculture even. I'm amazed at how many people are hitting up the same people, whether they're in business or they might be potential investors, or they're angel investors, or they're funding groups that are looking to throw money at the next best thing. But don't be afraid to look outside of Australia, where there's a lot of people that A, love Australians, B, have a passion for how genuine that they find us, and they are looking for the next great idea too. And one introduction leads to another very quickly. And if you maintain contact and you don't expect too much, then you don't know where it can go.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. Don't be afraid to go outside of Australia, as I think a lot of people are. Why do you think there's this fear or resistance for Australians to try and take their business international?
I think people see us as the best friend, the guy that they all want to have a beer with and a barbecue with, but potentially not business. They might think we're great people, and they know we're great people, and that's what opens up the doors. But geographically, because we're situated so far away too, people tend to worry about, well, if I generate some interest, how do I get to these meetings, and how do I afford to travel? And that's where I clearly say, don't bother about doing any of that, because we have Skype, we have Zoom, we've got the ability to interact and gauge whether there's genuine interest before you take that next step. And I'm still quite surprised that people that have interest in overseas territories jump on a plane and they spend weeks going to meetings and ultimately come back with very little, because the research and all the build-up wasn't done before they departed.
Yeah, and look, it sounds to me like that can be an expensive process. I mean, for yourself, how have you got about raising capital to be able to fund, your business to date? Has it been self-funded, or have you gone and found investors? What have you done?
A combination, because a lot of us, despite whether we've got an invention or a business, we tend to want to own as much of that as possible at the end. But it's not feasible, and people shouldn't be afraid of giving away some equity. So I have gone to investors that I was introduced to, and also people that I knew that had been successful in their own right. And instead of just going to them and bailing them up and saying, I want your money, I actually say to them, I followed your progress. I'm amazed about what you've accomplished. I've got some business ideas that I'd love to run past you and get your feedback. One of the things that people that are successful tend to love is just people asking them for what they think. They're not asking them for money or for contacts at this stage. Once you get into that conversation, those people will say, yes, we think this is great. Hey, I know someone you should talk to. Or I'm interested. What are you willing to do here? And then that's where you can go back and work on a proposal, and then ultimately try and see whether you can get some funding coming in. But yes, you do have to give away some equity to do so.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see a lot of companies that are succeeding have quite often had to give away a small slice of the pie to be able to get a bigger slice themselves. It's not an unusual thing to do, is it?
No, it's not, and it's also not unusual in my industry to give away a reasonably big slice of the pie, because otherwise you can become someone with a grand idea that everyone loves, but no one's willing to part with, because you can't come to a compromise whereby they want a share that's ultimately bigger than what you'd like to give away, but they have the money and the expertise and the global reach to do things far quicker. And then if you're left with a smaller percentage than you'd like, well, at least it's a smaller percentage of something that ultimately could be large rather than 100% of nothing. And there's a lot of people that fall into that trap.
Yeah, 100% of nothing is not very good to have, unfortunately. So tell me a bit about, your inspirations, or people. Have you got mentors or people you look up to that have really inspired you in growing your business?
I do have now. When I first started, I was a big fan of just sitting out on my balcony reading sort of analysis books and business books, and ultimately just started grabbing the highlighter. And what I would do is I'd read a book and just highlight the bits that excited me, and then I would go back and I'd transfer all those highlighted pieces onto paper, and then I would keep those bits of paper and read them every now and then to keep me inspired. So at the start, it was just simply reading and learning from people that had done it and been there. And then from that point, seeking out others that I would meet along the way. So whether that was in my industry or outside it, anyone that had success in their field, I would just give them a card, or I'd simply go up and give them a handshake and say, I would really love to take you for a coffee and to have a chat about some things that I'm doing, but also to learn from you. And some would say no, but those that would say yes, you would always come away learning something that was ultimately going to help you go forward.
Yeah, great stuff. And you know, when you talk about, you've read a lot of books, you think that's an important part of any business owner's development, entrepreneur's development, is making sure they're continually learning. Is that something you've done ongoing? I
think so. And you've got to be careful that you're not just doing reading for the sake of reading or attending functions just because you're going to be inspired for 5 minutes and then walk away and not follow it up. But yes, you must continue to learn, because I don't know anyone out there, despite how successful they've been, that have ever said to me that they know it all. Sometimes we think that we know, and we're so passionate about our idea that we get frustrated and we wonder why the people we're talking to can't see why this can't be a success, or why they shouldn't be giving us lots of money. And that's probably because it's part of the learning curve. There's a reason why they don't want it, or the reason why they don't think what you're offering is going to benefit them. So the more we listen and the more we allow others to sometimes ask some questions, the more we can absorb that, take it back to the office, and then work on how we do it better next time.
Yeah, and you mentioned before talking to people that had success in the past. How do you define success? When you go looking for these people, is there a particular level that they had to reach before you say, yep, that person's successful?
It's a very good question. I would say how I defined them to be of benefit to me was they had to have had past success in my industry. So, or they had to have invested in projects that ultimately, or the majority of, had gone on to be profitable or to be on sold for good money as well. And that could mean that they might have been someone that was reasonably small in the overall context of how global businesses run, but they've been able to turn something that, is turning over X amount, and they've, tripled it in a short time because of their contacts or their expertise. So if I think that someone can turn my business into something that's worth more in a quick period of time, that's a great way to determine whether they're going to be good for you. Or if there's someone that is well connected, that's another group of individuals that I have a strong tie in. In America, they call it reaching out. But they reach out and they do it really quickly. You have one conversation with them, and then within the next 10 minutes, there's emails flying through everywhere that those people are introducing you to others that they believe can help you. And it's a great way to get a very strong network very quickly.
Yeah, and having been, you're quite worldly, which is good. I mean, you've done a very diverse career. I mean, coming from sport into acting into radio, and now entrepreneurialism. I mean, this is not your first business. What do you think? There's some sort of pattern or a formula or some secret to success for entrepreneurs that if someone follows, that they can become successful?
Yeah, I always say, the back of my mind is always telling me, don't give up. But like any business, there comes a point where if you've been trying for long enough, or pouring your finances into it for long enough, or getting the door closed on you, that you have to know when to rip that Band-Aid off and to stop. And that's very hard when we're passionate about business. So I think I've learned two things. And like you said at the very start, a lot of people have had businesses that have worked, that some have failed. I'm no exception to that. But I've learned lessons on the back of that, just to know when is the point that you have to stop going forward thinking that it can be a success and pouring more money into it. And secondly, what are the people saying when you're pitching to them? So listen to what they are saying. And I think that's a basis for me of whether I think it should go to a follow-up meeting or keep expending energy and time on that same project. Is what are they saying? Are they 100% loving it, or is this just a part of them that thinks it's okay, or do you need to tweak the whole thing or forget about it? So all of those things you've got to juggle and work out what's the best option from here forward.
Yeah, and how long do you think someone should stick with something before giving up? Because you've probably heard that saying before, where they say quitters never win and winners never quit. I don't think that applies to business. So,
it's hard because people might be on limited funding, and that only gets them so far. And if they haven't got the contacts or the sort of know-how to go forward and find an investor, without that financial backing, things can slow down very, very quickly. And then once that money's gone, how many ideas are shelved or put back into the filing cabinet? There's hundreds. People would be out there saying, I thought of that once. How often have we watched or heard or seen something and go, I actually had that on paper years ago. But if you don't follow it through, there's no opportunity to get a result. But in the same context, if you go too hard and you're not trained in the area of how to actually best go about pitching an idea, you may well get interest, but you may also waste a lot of your money and time. So I think one of the things that I would say, and I don't know whether it works for everyone, but don't do it alone. Don't go out there and try and do it on your own. Try and find people that have done it or that have the ability in that industry to showcase to you whether it can work or not, and then start taking that advice and those connections and doing it in a collaborative effort.
Yeah, and Troy, you mentioned before, listening to the people when you were pitching to them, and you said sometimes they'll love it, sometimes I think it's okay, sometimes they won't be excited at all. What are you looking for when you're listening to that feedback?
I'd say that it'd be giving them the elevator pitch, which we spoke about first. So when we go into these environments, the people that we're pitching to, I can guarantee you that 100% of them, all they're wanting to know is what's in it for me. So at the start, if you can't actually entice them to ask you more questions, then I think that's a pretty good sign that whatever you're saying is either confusing them or is boring them or is of no interest to them. So what I'm looking for is to give them something straight off the bat, not about how great my idea is, but what I've done to this point to make the idea very fruitful for the person that I'm speaking to, and then I give them a chance to ask more questions. And once that happens and they're asking questions, that's generally a good sign that they want to hear more and they're willing to potentially, partner with you or at least connect you with the right people.
Your background being in, first of all in sport, but then of course you're always performing in a team and then doing the performance on television and on radio. Has that helped you with your pitching? Would you say that people that have a natural ability to present have got a better chance of succeeding as an entrepreneur, or is it something that can be learned?
It's definitely something that can be learned. I think one of the things is in front of television or the radio mic, there's so much build up and preparation that I would say a lot of people would be very good at doing that. I think the thing that's hard is, and most people will attest to this, is public speaking. When you've got to get up, whether it's at work in front of 10 people or in front of, big crowds, which is essentially part of pitching, when you've got to walk into a room and there's people waiting. If you can't feel confident or get your message across in a way that people listen and like you before they get to your message, then you're in a bit of strife. So I'd say that, that ability to learn how to walk into a room and not to be cocky or overconfident or egotistical, but to merely know your stuff and feel comfortable delivering it, that's a big part of getting the ear and the eye of the people that you're trying to deliver to.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Now, if you could go back in time, 15 years ago or 20 years ago and start all over again, what would you do differently? Is there anything you do differently to what you've done?
Yep, I would definitely say I wouldn't try and own 100% of every project that I embarked on. I would come up with an idea. I would get, a business plan into place, or at least some projections or some ideas on the market that I'm working in. And then I would see who's at the top of their game in that given market or that industry. And I would try to touch base with these people, or at least people that have been immersed in that industry, and get some feedback on them. Because the amount of money and time that I wasted without knowing what the shortcuts were, and when I say shortcuts, I'm not trying to cut corners for any other reason, that there are a lot of things that we do when we're pitching an idea or getting a business ready that we don't necessarily have to do, and ultimately it costs us not only time but a lot of money.
Yeah, and I'm hearing this reoccurring theme of getting other people involved. Would you say it's been an integral part to have a good team around you? Absolutely. I couldn't say it any better myself. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily give up
I don't know, call it leadership or the operations, you still are able to be the captain of the ship. But, I suppose if we think of that analogy, if you are the captain of a ship and you're out and things get a bit stormy or rough and you've got no crew around to help you, the end result isn't going to be too good. So, yeah, it just comes down to the fact that whether you're hiring people or you're collaborating with them or you're sharing equity with these parties, two things need to happen. They need to be the right people. That's because they know the industry, and also you need to get on well with them, because I know that wasn't part of the initial question, but if you get to a point where the people that you've teamed up with, you're not getting on well with, that can end very ugly as well, and we've all seen that happen.
You were saying at the beginning of our chat, Troy, that one of the traits you felt that come from sports people into business that made them successful was discipline. Have you got any tips around how you stay focused and disciplined on the task at hand to get to achieve your goals?
I think it is that when you're working in the environment where you're entrepreneurial, or you are essentially working for yourself, any time that you have off, or a day that you don't go into work, or a holiday that you have, you're not actually getting rewarded for that. And that's really hard in the interim, where I always thought, if you work for yourself, well, you just reward yourself with lots of time off and go into work whenever you want. But it doesn't work like that. I'd say the best piece of advice is very, very careful if you have a home office, because that can essentially mean that you end up on the couch watching, your favourite TV show and not immersing yourself in the business. But also knowing that for every hour or every weekend or every bit of downtime that you don't sort of start becoming proactive, or at least thinking about how you can better your idea, it just puts you a further step behind, not only in your project, but it probably puts you behind the other people that are working a lot harder and a lot smarter.
Yeah, some good tips there. Television's got its place, but I think people watch way too much, and then, they say, I didn't have time to do anything, and you go, well, I'm sure you had time to watch telly.
Yeah, it's a bit like going to the gym, isn't it, or putting the sneakers on and going for a walk. Generally, people will say that they didn't have time to do any exercise, but they seem to have quite a bit of time to hit the pub at 5 p.m. on Friday with their mates and roll home at 8, and then, go to the football game and do all the other things. And we all love doing that, and you should reward yourself. But, if it's to the jeopardy of an idea that you're pouring money into and you're trying to get off the ground, I think you've got to be very conscious of that.
So, knowing that you need that accountability. I mean, we talk about, at the beginning we spoke about you being in AFL and those sporting teams, and you had to be at practice, you had to be at game time, you had to roll up on time or before time. So there was all this accountability for you to perform and then succeed. How do you keep that accountability of yourself now that you're an entrepreneur and you're driving your own vision? Have you got ways that, somebody that holds you accountable?
Yeah, someone that holds me accountable. I'd say that's why getting collaborative partners or investors is a really good idea, because ultimately, if they give you money, which essentially most of us need if you're not fully flush with funds already, if they give you money, then they're going to want to know, what are you doing to try and maximise the ability for this idea to get off the ground? So what I would recommend is that you enter into a reporting system, and I find that works really well for me. So whether that's once a week or once a fortnight, but ultimately, I write a report that has to go to my investors to tell them what I'm currently doing and what I've been doing to maximise the ability for the business to become successful. And I find that as I'm writing that, if I haven't got anything to report, it's not good. Or if I'm telling them things that aren't true, it'll very quickly come back to haunt me. So I think that reporting system, by having others involved with you, means that when you're telling them what you're doing and what you're going to do, you don't have time to sleep in the morning because you're thinking, I've got to perform and I've got to get those things done as promised.
Well, it's the scorecard, really, isn't it? It's the scorecard of the game of business.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're just about out of time, Troy. How can people find out more?
My website's troygray.com.au, and Gray is spelt with an A. And it's also linked to the name of my company, which is Vox, VOX, voxventures.com.au. And ultimately, there's some contact forms you'll find there. Or just on social media, Troy Gray MC, MC being primarily because I do a lot of on-stage work. And you'll also find me by putting in Troy Gray and Vox Ventures onto LinkedIn. And I'd love to hear from anyone that not only has an idea for television shows, or how to immerse themselves in that television industry, but someone that might just want some assistance going forward with any business idea.
Yeah, great stuff, Troy. It's been an absolute pleasure, mate. It's you know what, I love hearing these stories of success, and you're good to see the great things that you're doing, not just here in Australia, but on the international stage. I think that it's awesome to see that you're pushing forward and you're getting those results and kicking those goals, mate. So well done.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
My absolute pleasure, mate. Now, there's only one thing left to do, and that is the 60-second scramble. Are you ready for that?
I'm ready. Let's go.
I wish I had Ice Ice Baby to play in the background, but I don't.
Well, you're lucky you don't, because for 60 seconds, all you'd hear me doing is singing the words.
All right, well, I'll start the clock and let's get the questions going. Favourite app on your phone?
Facebook.
Oh, dear. Best way to tune out and relax?
Facebook.
Okay, your favourite book?
I'd say there's a number of them, but yeah, anything to do with business or entrepreneurial help.
Nice stuff. Do you have a hidden talent?
I've tried to do a one-arm handstand. If that's a talent, it's not bad, but try doing it while you're holding a drink. That's a talent.
And drinking a beer upside down, that'd be interesting. What's your biggest addiction?
Work. I've been trying to accomplish goals, starting it and then finishing it.
Great stuff. What frightens you the most?
Spiders, even the little ones.
Describe yourself in one word.
Happy.
Number one tip for being more efficient?
Accountable.
Let's say stay off of Facebook.
Yeah. Facebook's only there because it's the only way I can keep in contact with family that are all overseas. So I should clarify that. There should be
Nice stuff. And I've got to agree with you, mate. I'm on Facebook a fair bit, but I find it's an amazing tool for free. And this is just another innovative business that's brought us such an amazing service. And another example of how just serving people can be so successful. Once again, mate, thanks so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, mate, and I just wish you all the best in the future.
Thank you so much, Ben. Appreciate it.
Edutaining with business brain food.
Well, thanks again, Troy, for coming onto the show. What an amazing guy and such a great story. I love talking to people that have been involved in a team sports environment in the past and that have gone into business, because I think they have such clear and concise messages about discipline and teamwork, having the right people around you. One of the things that I thought was interesting in that chat was he kept coming back to having other people involved and not having to have 100% of the pie. And I think that's so important for people in business, is that it's easy for you to think that giving away a little bit is going to be detrimental, when in fact that is a detrimental way of thinking, and it can cost you something in the long run. So maybe your business idea is fantastic, but it just lacks capital. And if you've got a great idea, go and find somebody who can fund it for you, who can fund it to the next level, because it could be what makes the biggest difference. And when I look at my circle of friends, those who've got really successful business have gone out, they've reached out, they've found investors, and it's catapulted them. And they may have had to give up a small percentage of their business. Maybe they've given up a significant amount of their business, but it's meant that they've got a percentage of something rather than 100% of nothing. So great message there from Troy. So good to have him come on the show, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I loved it. Love always having these fantastic guests that we get on the show. It's just amazing. I love it. It's almost like, I think I've said before, it's a bit selfish. I get them on and I have a chat for my own sake, and you just get to listen in, which is kind of cool. All right, well, that's it for today's show. Once again, I want to say thanks for tuning in. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you are enjoying the show, please leave an honest review or rating in the iTunes store. Always love to get your feedback. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, if you're not already, jump onto businessbrainfood.com.au, follow the links there to join the Facebook group. We are in there having a good, jolly old chat about all things business, and you, my friend, are missing out. So, facebook.com/groups/businessbrainfood. Come and join us. Join the conversation. Come and chat with me. We'll see you there. Until next time, have a profitable day. Cheerio.
You can fly higher than the sky, shine brighter than the stars. You can have all you ever wanted.
The Business Brain Food podcast is brought to you by MaxMyProfit.com.au. Head to MaxMyProfit.com.au to download your free copy of the business planning template they've used to help thousands of Aussie businesses take their businesses from good to great. MaxMyProfit.com.au.